I asked my friend Chris Gay, entrepreneur and founder of Every Health, Chris, how did you become an entrepreneur? What advice would you give to someone starting a new venture? What are the lessons you've learned in your entrepreneurial journey? What Chris said didn't surprise me, but it would surprise many people who've never been an entrepreneur, who've never tried to start a new business, and who've only read or listened to the highly sanitized stories of entrepreneurial success. As Chris points out, being an entrepreneur is hard. It's a life filled with rejection, often littered with failure, and is not for the faint at heart. But Chris has been an entrepreneur for the past 25 years and wouldn't have it any other way. Join my conversation with Chris and learn why.
In terms of risk tolerance, yes, you do need very high risk tolerance. And more importantly, your spouse needs to welcome, if you're married or planning to be married, your spouse needs to tolerate your risk tolerance. And I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs miscalculate badly, including myself. I did early on. I didn't realize just how much I was pulling everyone else around me into my risky endeavors. Financial security and entrepreneurship are antithetical to each other. It's like oil and water. The most talented entrepreneurs out there can do everything right and still get financially hurt because you don't control everything. You don't control the broader market. You don't control some of the events that happen. Yeah, you don't control the funding sources and what happens at your largest customer group that you worked for years to win. Sometimes things just hit you sideways despite you doing everything right.
I'm your host, Mark Goode, and this is Remarkable, a podcast focused on people and stories worthy of your attention. And now, today's show. And we're back with my Remarkable podcast. Our guest is Chris Gay, CEO and co-founder of Every Health. Chris, thanks again for joining me today.
Thank you, Mark, for having me on the air.
Hey, I appreciate it. Listen, would like to talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey. You said in a previous episode that you've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. Before we talk about your professional background, talk a little bit about your home life. Was there anything about your background in your home life, how you grew up, where you grew up, that sort of predisposed you to becoming an entrepreneur?
Excellent question. Yes. I grew up as an Army brat all over southeastern United States and for a long period of time in Germany on U.S. Army communities or nearby. Then we'd stay in the German villages nearby. We always stayed off base. So my parents were excellent at trying to inculcate us with the local culture and athletic teams and friends and things like that. And so you got used to making new friends. You got used to accustomed to new ideas, new ways of doing things, right? Every 3 years, you move to a new community in the military, and everything is different. When you add in a foreign culture, I personally really benefited from that experience. You realize no matter how much you may have liked things at home, sometimes things, in this culture are simply better than the way we do things in America. Add into that, my father was very entrepreneurial in his own way, was an early adopter of a lot of technology. And I still remember when I was a young child, he was doing his thesis on effectively a portable computer that would dial into a mainframe. This is back when we had Atari and VIC-20 and Commodore 64 computers. As soon as one of those was available, he bought a Commodore 64 for us. And then I remember we got the portable version. Like, if we still had this, it'd be a museum piece. It was the SX64. It was a portable version of the Commodore 64. It had a little cathode ray tube, like a 6-inch screen or 8-inch screen. And it weighed like 60 pounds. This big briefcase with a huge handle. And the face would pop off, and that was your keyboard. And we were so proud of that because we had all the power of a Commodore 64 programmable, and you could go over with your 5.25-inch floppy drive, and we go play video games with the friends and swap video games and coding tricks. So, yes, I think the life abroad in Germany and life in a military family and life with a father that was an early adopter of technology predisposed me to an entrepreneurial career.
That's really interesting because, again, in a previous episode, when you talked about your early experience with Goldman and you were in one division and then you moved to another that was technical, were you actually writing code? Were you a software guy?
I was not. I'd been writing code in university, but I didn't have a formal major in engineering or computer science. So I was all self-taught. And then I got to Goldman, the division I was at was called the Archon Group. And it's all spreadsheets. And so you had to learn to write VBA macros. And then there was a very drawn out process. We were managing, my department managed portfolios of real estate. And a lot of that is grabbing numbers and reporting numbers back. And I realized I could speed things up and get my job done a lot faster if I eliminated some of the process steps. If I went down and talked to the people in IT and like, hey, can I make direct calls from my VBA code to the data warehouse instead of all these interstitial steps where we key it all in and we could have transcription errors and right? Would you give me some lookup tables that I'm allowed to directly access? And eventually I did. And so then my models, I get my work done faster because I was able to pull in the data directly. That's how I got to know the IT team. And then I just made friends. They were good people down there. We wrote the IT team back then. This is mid 90s, late 90s. Java was no longer named Oak. It had officially been named Java. Java was rolling out. The team that I interacted with on the application side had previously been mostly Power Builder apps. And then Java came along and we were migrating a lot of the big systems over to Java. And the decision was made that was going to be the core application development language. And then behind on the data side, we were an Oracle shop. To be a good application developer there, you had to pick up Java, you had to pick up VBA, and you needed to understand SQL quite well. So you didn't annoy the database administrators.
So when you started doing entrepreneurial things, because again, in this previous episode, you talked about corporate world, not corporate world. Being an entrepreneur requires at least two qualities. One is that you have to have, what I call a compelling vision for some sort of value add, some sort of improvement, something that the market doesn't have, but that the market needs. You need that. But the other thing is you have to have this ability to calibrate risk and tolerate failure, particularly rejection. How did you develop that over time in your career?
Not easily. Rejection still hurts. Even at this age, after all the decades of experience, rejection still hurts. That never changes. If any of your listeners work in sales, they know rejection well. You get a lot of no's before you get a yes. You have to develop with thick skin. So dealing with rejection was just a learned behavior. It wasn't an easy one to learn. I didn't get any formal training in it. At the end of the day, it's the same skill sets that we teach athletes. It's the same skill set that we teach salespeople and people in business development. You're going to have a lot of losses in the athletic world, and you're going to have a lot of no's, unreturned calls, failed bids, rejections as a salesperson. And so those same behaviors translate over. It's the same lessons learned into being an entrepreneur. In terms of risk tolerance, yes, you do need very high risk tolerance. And more importantly, your spouse needs to welcome, if you're married or planning to be married, your spouse needs to tolerate your risk tolerance. And I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs miscalculate badly, including myself. I did early on. I didn't realize just how much I was pulling everyone else around me into my risky endeavors. Even if they're not writing a check, even if they have their own salary, their own career, entrepreneurs, we're pulling everyone else into that life and that lifestyle. And it's quite turbulent and it has a lot of family impact. So when I get a hold of young entrepreneurs, I try to politely help them count the cost a little better. Think through this a little, man. Would you? So that's just how I see it. I agree with you that entrepreneurs need to have a high tolerance of risk because our society is structured to encourage careers in large corporate or government jobs. If you step off of those paths, it is not easy. And I agree with you that you have to handle rejection well because you're going to get told no 100, 200 times easily. Sometimes on some issues before you ever hear a yes.
So if you were talking to your younger self, let's say 20 years ago,
You're married, if I know your timeline right. I don't think you had children at that point. You may not have.
We did not. We were still single. For the first 10 years, we were not single. We still were married, no children for the first 10 years.
What would you tell that younger self, and what would you tell people today? Peel back the layers of the onion a little bit about, as you just were talking about, as you talk to young entrepreneurs, what are some of the lessons learned you would share as both a husband and a father?
Well, first, I would tell people you're pulling your family in with you. And you need to understand the risk that entails, particularly if you're choosing to start a family and have children. Financial security and entrepreneurship are antithetical to each other. It's like oil and water. Until you've gotten to the point you're at a company that's throwing off lots of free cash flow, that would be enormously stressful. So I go back to my younger self, I would be careful there. The other one that I would tell people, or I routinely tell people, is just live really lean. Our culture in the United States encourages overindulgence and consumerism, I believe, to an excessive degree. And this shows itself in people buying more house than they need, renting more house than they need, having a newer car instead of, driving the one you have until the wheels fall off and maintaining it, on and on and on. And so if you come out of school and your goal is to keep up with the proverbial Joneses next door, you're not going to have a lot of free cash lying around. And back to the first point, there's a lot of financial risk when you do this. That also creates relationship risk. You want to save up as much money as possible before you go do a startup, or you buy a small business that you want to improve and turn around. If you want to take a more traditional SBA approach, you want to save up as much money as possible, and to do so, just live lean. If you can get by in a 600 square foot apartment instead of a 1,200 square foot apartment, do the 600 square feet and bank the money. If you can get by driving your college car, your little sedan beater for another 10 years, do that. Bank the money. You want to have many, many, many months, ideally more than a year's worth of cash handy to support you, so you won't starve. You can pay rent and you won't starve before you go build a startup. And that's my personal opinion. Those are the two big things I would counsel people to think through.
One of the impulses, Chris, that I hear from you, and I've known this about you for a long time, is that your view of entrepreneurship isn't wrapped up solely or simply in financial return for yourself. It's about the impact that you can have, particularly, and I know this is true of Every Health, and I heard you talk about the previous insurance company, is the positive impact you can have on the community that you serve. How important is that, or should that be, to entrepreneurs?
Well, it's very important to me. Many entrepreneurs that I've met, it is not important to them. They are focused more on doing a problem that interests them. It just interests them generally. Me, I'm interested also in social impact. If I can find a problem that is technically interesting, that it engages my mind and skills, absolutely, I want to work on that. If I can find a problem that is technically interesting and has a positive social impact, yeah, that's what I want to spend the next several years of my life. We only have so many years on this earth, and I'd like to do something meaningful with it. We can all make money. That's the easy, broad path. I'd like to make enough to take care of my family and do something interesting along the way that has social benefit. It's nice to make money, but it's not my prime motivation. I have a duty and obligation to make money for the people that have invested, and I take that very seriously. And I want them to make big returns on investment because they believed in making a difference. And when others didn't, they deserve to be rewarded for that. In general, most entrepreneurs, I think, in my experience, are a little enthralled with the idea of being independent. Particularly younger entrepreneurs have misconceptions about what the life is like. They've seen too many well-positioned stories that only mention the positives and don't mention the negatives. I think older entrepreneurs that have been through it, like you, like me, I think are a little more honest about the balances that you've got to strike and the trade-offs, and that even the most talented entrepreneurs out there can do everything right and still get financially hurt because you don't control everything. You don't control the broader market. You don't control some of the events that happen. Yeah, you don't control the funding sources and what happens at your largest customer group that you worked for years to win. Sometimes things just hit you sideways despite you doing everything right. I appreciate it when people tell me the ways it can go wrong, because the one thing you don't want to know is you don't want to get surprised by things. So I like hearing all the war stories from other entrepreneurs that have been through it.
Well, it's certainly comforting. Well, Chris, you've been generous with your time today. I appreciate it very much. And I look forward to following up with you at some point in the future to see how things continue to evolve at Every Health.
Thank you very much, Mark.
I'm Mark Goode. You've been listening to my remarkable podcast. For more episodes like this, as well as premium content, visit my site, markgoode.substack.com.